Downing Street has taken aim at the BBC, confirming they're considering scrapping the licence fee for a subscription model and forcing the sale of most of its radio. Now, to be clear, the BBC is an iconic British brand. It must not, however, be held up to be infallible and untouchable. The corporation has become analogous to many US tech giants, undeniably bloated, squeezing out local competition and stifling start-up innovation. Such near-monopoly power is unfairly subsidised by a regressive flat tax that outrageously makes it a criminal offence not to pay for the licence fee for watching any live programme on any device, even if not a BBC show. The licence fee is simply unfair, unprogressive and unsustainable. It belongs firmly in the top-down world of the last century. Yes, let's ring-fence the BBC's world-class news and current affairs, but it should never be criminal for refusing to pay for entertainment if you don't consume it. Resisting change here can only be done by mounting a nostalgic, conservative defence of the status quo. But since when is that progressive?
Well, you know, as a former Director General, it was almost inevitable that I was going to come back.
I thought you were going to pick this topic, Craig.
I think the discussion about the licence fee is a valid one, in the sense that if someone came along today and said, we're going to invent this, we're going to have a television in your house, you've got to pay £150 tax, which we can use for programming, it would have no chance, right? It would have no chance. However, when you start looking at all the alternatives, it's quite difficult.
What about a mixed model?
Well, what matters, I think, and this is the conclusion I reached after sort of 4 years of looking, universality, that this is available to everybody. And that matters, I think. I think that you have a set of services that are available to everybody. I mean, I've seen some of the criticisms. I mean, for instance, the Sunday Times wrote a leader basically saying they've closed down local newspapers. You know, it's completely no. What's closed down local newspapers is the advertising model for local newspapers is defunct. It's gone because actually all those ads now go online, and that's what happened to local newspapers. Nothing to do with the BBC. There is, I think, a process that we need to go through that requires a long, thought-out commission, probably, who works out, OK, what are the alternatives? What is the best way of doing this? When Mrs Thatcher tried to put ads on the BBC, she got a right-wing economist to do a report on it, who came out and said, it won't work. It won't work. And I'd like to see some more thought go into this. In particular, though, let me add...
But are you pro-reform, Greg?
Yeah.
You're sounding a bit equivocal.
No, I'm pro-thought.
Yeah.
I'm pro... I'm pro...
I hope we all are.
No, I'm pro... No, we're not all, because some people are doing
pro-thinking.
It's straightforward for ideological reasons. What's interesting is this quote from Damien Green, who says, destroying the BBC wasn't in our manifesto. And would be cultural vandalism. Well, forget about the cultural vandalism bit.
But forget about the destroying bit as well, because that's not what I'm proposing.
But destroying the BBC, it requires thought. It requires a proper...
How does anything I said mean I'm destroying it?
It's a profligate organisation. I think, you know, what people talk... There's a hysteria around this. We're not going to lose the BBC. It's just going to be put on the same commercial footing, hopefully, as other companies are.
OK, so how do you put local radio, BBC local radio, onto any sort of commercial footing at all? Let me tell you, it won't pay for itself.
Well, if it won't pay for itself, is there a justification for it existing?
But then that's the discussion.
But can we? I just wanted to. But let me finish about it's a point about profligacy, and it's, you know, we have, you know, we read day after day about the scores of executives on 200 and 300 grand a year, their gold-plated pensions. When they get a payoff, they get 3 years' money plus the gold-plated pension. And you know, if they make a mistake like they did with the digital media platform, which cost 100 million quid, most commercial companies would suffer because of that. The BBC just wipe their face and move on because they know the next year there's a truckload of licence fee money coming to pay for their mistakes.
Can I just say, I don't see why Greg thinks it's ideological anyway to object to the fact the state is ordering people to pay a tax to watch a form of media which they may not actually watch. Why should the state be taxing at the commercial disadvantage of their rivals? And Carol says about the size of the BBC. I remember interviewing Mark Thompson, Director of the General of the BBC, and said, how many people does the BBC employ? He didn't have a clue. And he told me this story, which underlines the problems at the BBC. When a BBC hostage who'd been in captivity in the Middle East for a couple of years had been released, he got one call from Sky to fix up an interview. 38 calls from the BBC, different outlets, to do the same interview. It is out of control, and it's out of control because it's got a state-guaranteed subsidy.
June hasn't come in yet.
Well, as the current Director of Creative Diversity, I think what we must not lose sight of is the fact that our BBC is the envy of the world. When you speak to broadcasters around the world, they are completely envious that we have something like this, that we have all of it, that we have an institution like this. And also, it is the engine of our creative industry. If you look at the relationship with the independent sector in terms of independent production companies, the BBC is the biggest buyer. So actually, if the BBC goes, our creative industry goes.
You know, and
I don't think people make that correlation.
I've got a bit of information on this.
Please.
So, but there's been a 50% increase in the number of European productions made by Netflix.
Still
as well.
doesn't compare to what we buy.
They are catching up,
all.
though. Yeah.
Can I, let's talk about this. You know, we call it a state broadcaster, but it's, you know, it's
no, we don't call it a state broadcaster.
Well, they do.
The BBC doesn't call it a state broadcaster.
They might not, but everyone knows.
A state broadcaster is run by the government of the day.
So, OK, so it's supposed to be... it's a state broadcast in the sense that we all pay a tax to watch it. However, I don't want to pay a tax to watch something that I don't think is broadly representative of the state anymore.
So can I...
No, I'm in the middle of a point. I just want to say that, you know, the BBC has been roundly criticised recently over the fact of its left-wing bias, also its bias recently towards Brexit. I don't want to watch a TV station that tells me something that puts a slant on news that I don't agree with.
But you're not the best judge, are you? Because
of course
you come
I'm the best
from a particular perspective, just like him, which is way out there.
It's supposed to be unbiased.
So your judgment about bias isn't valid,
The BBC
actually.
didn't actually put out Boris Johnson's speech on Brexit night. Whether you agree with Brexit or not, it was a historic occasion.
But the left have complained in the same way. Both sides have complained.
The left aren't looking at what the BBC is doing.
But can I just say one thing?
It's not about bias.
I just want to pick up one quick point. So you said that you do not want to pay for entertainment that you don't consume or be criminalised for entertainment you don't consume. You wouldn't be. If you're not consuming entertainment, you're not consuming live TV, then you do not have to pay for the...
How many people
now... No, hold on, I need to clarify this. If you're consuming any live TV on any device, even if it's not a BBC programme...
That's what I said. If you're not consuming live TV on any device, then you won't need to pay for it.
I could be watching live Sky and not the BBC, but I'm still paying for the BBC.
But
that's not fair.
No, but the licence fee is to allow you to be able to consume television, period.
Yeah, but I could be watching a live broadcast from America.
Okay, but
I'm paying the British government tax for that.
But you can't watch live broadcasts
on my phone, I could be watching live CNN. Why am I paying a BBC licence fee for that? Now that's
I don't
the
know
point.
about CNN. I'm talking about national.
Any live broadcast on any device, that even if it's not a BBC programme,
of course,
you have to pay for your.
But that's always been the case.
That's right, and that's what I'm saying is unfair.
But why is the BBC doing so much? It's just doing too much. It's too ambitious. It's too big. It's too it's bloated. Exactly. It's out of control.
I have a question for the panel. If on a point of principle, I said I'm going to watch live CNN on my iPhone and I refuse to pay the BBC and got a criminal offence for it.
Right.
Would you sympathise with me?
No.
Can I just say
why?
Can I give you the statement from?
Why not?
Can I give you the statement from Sir David Clementi, the chairman of the BBC?
I pay my licence fee.
He said the BBC is a great national asset. A diminished BBC is a weakened United Kingdom, and he's right. Sitting behind a paywall, it would no longer be the place that brings the country together for the Strictly final, or Gavin and Stacey on Christmas Day, or the Armistice anniversary, or Holocaust Memorial. Let me finish. Nor would it be the place that all could turn to celebrate live important moments we enjoy as a nation. A royal wedding, or jubilees, or the Olympic successes. He's right.
Well, I think the irony of the whole thing, of course, is that the biggest supporters of the BBC are actually the south of England middle class who disproportionately vote Tory. And I suspect if the Conservative Party or a rump, a bit of the Conservative Party tries to push this thing through, they will have enormous opposition within.
Greg, they're not trying to wreck the BBC.
They're not. What about what Gary Lineker says? He says, I would make the licence fee voluntary. I don't know the logistics of how it would work. You would lose some people, but at the same time, you'd up the price a bit. You're forced to pay it if you want a TV, and therefore it's a tax. What he says about that?
Well, if it's voluntary, people won't pay it. Well, and how much is he being paid, by the way?
Well, exactly
1.8 million a year, and he's not even exclusive. But in Germany, they've got a broadcasting levy, and it's compulsory on every household.
It's time, I think, to scrap the BBC licence fee. Technology and television has changed, and the licence fee is now an outdated and ridiculous way to pay for a television station. Back in the day, of course, when I was a lad, there were only 3 TV stations to choose from. 2 of them were BBC stations. Now there's 300. People are used to paying a subscription for the television they want, whether that's Netflix, Amazon Prime, Sky Sports. You choose what you want to pay for. And if you don't pay the fee, the only penalty you face is those channels are switched off. Of course, the BBC licence fee really should be called the BBC poll tax. It is essentially a tax, and it's the same amount for every household, irrespective of their income or their wealth. So I think if you were against the poll tax, when Margaret Thatcher tried to bring that in for local government services, then on grounds of fairness, you should be against the BBC licence fee too. So this is the statue of George Orwell, just outside of the BBC here in London. When George Orwell resigned from the BBC in 1943, he told his superiors it was because he could no longer bear wasting his time and the public's money on producing no real results. If what Orwell said in 1943 was true, it's doubly true today in 2020. If the BBC is going to actually survive and thrive in the future, I think it's in the corporation's own interests to scrap the licence fee. It can't really charge much more than £157.50 a year. It's just too controversial to put that figure up. And if we want to see the BBC take on the new giants in television, like Amazon and like Netflix, then actually bringing in a subscription-based model rather than a compulsory licence fee would actually set the BBC free to properly compete on the global economic stage. Finally, there's an extraordinary human cost of the licence fee, and it being a criminal offence not to pay it if you deign to own a television set. About 180,000 criminal cases every year are for non-payment of the licence fee. About 30% of all criminal cases brought against women are for non-payment of the licence fee. It's pretty much 1 in 10, slightly above actually, of all criminal cases in the United Kingdom, and somewhere in the region of 100 people every year end up in jail for not paying the fine. That is a colossal waste of resources that should be really focused on proper crime fighting, and in my view, far too high a price to pay to have Strictly Come Dancing on free-to-air television. Whether you want to buy the BBC as a service in your living room should be up to you. You should buy it just like you buy any other television product, and in this day and age, making it compulsory to buy certain television stations is about as bizarre and crazy as making it compulsory to buy any particular newspaper.